The patrons have spoken, and they've given us the gift of Michael Cinccino, who directed classics such as The Deer Hunter and the underappreciated Heaven's Gate. After being unjustly blamed for the artistic indulgence leading to the collapse of New Hollywood, Cinccino appeared in Pokemon Black and White as one of the many interesting new Pokemon in the Unova region. Both it and its pre-evolution Minccino were on many players' in-games teams because they were among the most adorable pokes the franchise has ever come up with. Today, we examine if this level of cuteness translated to any sort of success in the competitive scene. And so, we ask, how good was Cinccino actually? But first, link yourself skillfully like Cinccino because this video is sponsored by Surfshark VPN. Surfshark is an app and browser extension that allows you to place your computer or phone virtually in any country as if you're actually there. Surfshark has 3,200 plus servers in 65 countries. And by using Surfshark to connect to servers in other countries, you can get access to content that is normally region locked. For example, if you wanted to watch Naruto Shippuden on American Netflix, I mean, they have some of the movies, but they don't have the series for some reason. But all you have to do is change your IP to Canada, and you now have access to 10 seasons of Naruto Shippuden on Canadian Netflix. And of course, being a VPN, Surfshark encrypts your data so that no one can access it while you're online, and your privacy is secured. And you can use one account on multiple devices. I personally have Surfshark on my phone, my tablet, and both of my PCs. So if you want a sick VPN and also support the channel to help us produce more content, get an exclusive Surfshark deal by entering the promo code FALLSWIPE or clicking the link in the description below and get Surfshark VPN for an extra 3 months for free. And in this video, we'll be going over these competitive formats. At first glance, you'd be forgiven for thinking Cinccino wouldn't be a very threatening Pokemon, even in the lower tiers, just one of many endless bland normal types. However, upon closer inspection, Cinccino would reveal it was not just dangerous, but uniquely so. Its skill link ability meant a guaranteed 5 hits on multi-hit moves, which went hand in hand, or tail and tail if you prefer, with its stab tail slap, which clocked in at 25 base power per hit, or a stunning 125 with its 5 skill linked hits. In effect, stronger than the likes of Hydro Pump and Fire Blast. Tail Slap wasn't the only move Cinccino's skill link turned into a consistent hard hitter either. It could also reap the benefits of excellent coverage in the forms of Rock Blast and Bullet Seed, both also packing the attributes of 25 base power per hit for a 125 base power attack. Now, this might have been wasted or at least not used to its fullest potential by a Pokemon who used skill link boosted attacks to compensate for a low attack stat, but that was not Cinccino, who packed a solid base 95 attack. Furthermore, it would have no issues with a lack of opportunities centered around a wanting speed stat. On the contrary, Cinccino packed an amazing base 115 speed stat, making it one of the fastest Pokemon in whatever tier to find its way into. And as per the Deoxys theorem, a high speed stat tends to create some sort of niche even for limited Pokemon, much less one with the potential firepower of Cinccino, as well as its utility potential in Substitute, Focus Sash, and sturdy breaking off its multi-hit moves, and the momentum it could bring with one of the best moves in the game, U-Turn. So with all this in mind, what tier did Cinccino wind up in? Though it wasn't a true Yu-Yu Pokemon, Cinccino actually had quite a respectable niche in the tier. Its main issues were that it was difficult to justify a normal type that wasn't Snorlax or Togekiss, two of the most elite Pokemon around, and doubling up on normal types famed for their issues wasn't advisable either. Furthermore, Cinccino's speed, while excellent, was not peerless. It was outrun by both Weavile and Crobat. So what was Cinccino's niche? Simple. On extremely fast-paced offense teams anchored by spikes, Cinccino was a ferocious, fast-paced wall breaker. It was capable of instantly threatening a great deal of Pokemon in the tier, including bulky walls like Rhyperior and bulky waters thanks to its access to Bullet Seed, something Weavile and Crobat couldn't boast, while also being more adroit a wielder of Life Orb, owing to its lack of Stealth Rock weakness. Another advantage it held over the two faster speedsters, which also let it U-turn in and out of battle more easily. It was a specific niche, but it was a legitimate one, and Cinccino saw occasional UU tournament usage and success as a result. However, its true home was RU, where Cinccino established itself as a premier threat. Its speed tier still wasn't the best. It was eclipsed by both Sceptile and Aerodactyl, but it was still blazing quick, outrunning the likes of Durant and smacking it hard with a Rock Blast. Durant was already considered one of the tier's fastest, and by outrunning it, Cinccino by extension ran circles around the rest of the tier. Durant was already considered one of the tier's fastest, and by outrunning it, Cinccino by extension ran circles around the rest of the tier. With this superb speed, Cinccino was poised to use his excellent strength to put a charge into pretty much everything that that wasn't a non-Durant steel type. Made especially dangerous with the quick spikes laid by the hyper offense teams, it was a near staple of. Now, steals were quite prominent in RU, with all of Steelix, Ferroseed, Aggron, and Magneton featuring regularly, but they were worn down alarmingly quickly by the spikes Cinccino enjoys so much, number one, and number two, Magneton's presence was actually a positive for Cinccino since it could use its magnet pull to especially dispatch the other steals, a task made especially easy thanks to Cinccino luring them in and you turning out of them for free Magneton entry. Number three, if Magneton was the opposing team's steel type, it wasn't really going to switch into Cinccino more than once, as Tail Slap hit it hard. As such, Cinccino had all the tools it needed, and as a result, it thrived in RU. Of course, Cinccino was not without flaw. It was incredibly frail with nearly no resist or defensive utility to speak of. Now, granted, being immune to Scarf Rotom's Shadow Ball was a valuable trait, but that was it. If Cinccino was playing defense, it was doing so by playing offense, outpacing and threatening the opponent. But that was just fine, because that was its purpose, and it was viciously efficient at it. Said lack of defensive utility meant it struggled to switch in of its own accord, but the plethora of Volt Switchers and U-turners in the tier meant it was quite easy to support it with switching opportunities through his teammates, especially when one of these Volt Switchers was Magneton. Again, the specificity of Cinccino's support and playstyle meant it was basically a Spikes hyper offense exclusive, or if not necessarily, then quite close to it. But considering how good it was at doing what it did, that was no problem. As a result, Cinccino was an excellent Pokemon in Gen 5 RU. Cinccino seemed off to a good start in Generation 6, wielding a newly buffed knockoff that both expanded his super effective coverage to include valuable targets in Psychic and Ghost types while also removing opponents' held items, most notably removing leftovers from bulky walls that might try to withstand it. Cinccino returned to RU, and this sadly wound up being what ruined it. It would have been excellent in NU, but because of the potential it had, inexperienced players kept using it in RU, even though it wasn't that good. It was so bad, in fact, that its continued existence in RU wound up being a point of derision, a running joke among the player base that Cinccino's own usage resulted in. Why was it so terrible? Plain and simple. The metagame was too bulk and longevity focused for Cinccino, which thrived off its run and gun playstyle. That type of team would generally run out of steam and get outlasted by the balanced squads that dominated the tier. However, seeing as Cinccino's complete lack of defensive utility meant it didn't fit on such teams, it didn't have a viable place in the tier at all. Even as a speedy revenge killing option, it was outclassed by Sneasel, who was equally fast and boasted stat pursuit to forcibly remove major threats. There just wasn't much Cinccino could muster against the Alomomola, Registeel, Escavalier, and Steelix laden RU metagame, but since so many players kept thinking it could, it kept getting used and lost out on the opportunity to slash through PU. Though rare, this type of phenomenon has happened a handful of times, and it's always quite a shame. Cinccino deserved better. Have no fear, because Cinccino returned with a vengeance in Generation 7. So ferocious was its fury in attempting to right how it had been wronged previously that Cinccino barely actually saw any play in the tier it wound up in, as it got banned just that quickly. And not only did it do that, it did it twice. That tier was PU, and the second the tier began to exist, Cinccino obliterated it with force that made the nuclear explosion from Terminator 2 look like a few 4th of July fireworks. The tier had barely even established its own existence, let alone sense of structure of what it actually was before. For the safety of all, Cinccino was quick banned. All that was known in those early days was that Cinccino outran and destroyed everything. Against such low base stat total Pokemon, Skill Link Tail Slap was an automatic deletion button. It was a precursor to how, with the same strategy, Apom would, come Ultra Sun and Moon, become the Mega Rayquaza of the tier. Cinccino was basically that, but first and in PU, which makes it even more impressive and hilarious. Speaking of Ultra Sun and Moon, when that came around, the ensuring power creep meant the player base was fooled into thinking Cinccino might be acceptable in the tier. You probably didn't expect this video to veer off into a parable of the foolishness of mankind, but how else is one meant to view such an idea? Cinccino made the player base suffer for this decision, though mercifully, the agony was so extreme that it didn't last long, for the player base took quick action and quick banned it again. At least they learned, which may be seen as a testament of humankind's potential for seeing their mistakes and making a change. Philosophy aside, Cinccino was utterly useless in NU, much like it had been in the previous generation's RU. Some players made use of a gimmicky King's Rock set, as the chance to flinch was actually incredibly high alongside Skill Link. Since it only needed King's Rock to activate on one of its 5 hits, this gave it obnoxiously high odds at cheesing its way past counters. However, most of the time it wasn't worth the effort, too plagued by bulk and steals. It didn't even matter though, as Cinccino's effective non-existence in NU was well worth it for the cataclysmic savagery it wrought upon the lowest tier, and the lesson in hubris it brought with it. Thanks to Dexit, Cinccino actually started Generation 8 in UU for the first time since its debut generation. The lack of steel types meant its tail slap was among the scariest attacks in the tier, difficult to safely resist since the most common normal resists were bullet seed fearing rock types. Furthermore, even steals wouldn't necessarily get in Cinccino's way now, since Gen 8 had also gifted it low kick. It was poised to become a major threat, but Cinccino wasn't just a threat in its own right. It supported its team with Choice Scarf of all sets. Scarfing such a fast Pokemon may initially seem counterintuitive, but it was exactly this that let it perform such a unique, valuable role. Not only could it revenge kill Dragon Dance Haxorus after a boost, it was so fast when Scarfed that it even outran Poltegeist, which had doubled its speed with Shell Smash. Even Poltegeist with its Focus Sash intact, which would thwart most revenge killing attempts, posed no problem for Cinccino thanks to its Skill Link's multi-hit effect ripping right through it. Choice Scarf was far from Cinccino's only option, of course. It could also don a different type of Scarf, the normal boosting Silk Scarf, which powered Tail Slap up to terrifying levels, 2-hit KOing some of the bulkiest Pokemon around, such as Umbreon and offensive Galarian Weezing. Alternatively to the computer throwing rage of players everywhere, King's Rock was quite common on Cinccino. It was so efficient at flinching past its counters, since it tended to only need one thanks to how hard it was hitting them, that King's Rock was banned. A prime example of how uncompetitive an item it was. What wasn't tried on Cinccino was heavy duty boots, at least not yet. Early in the generation, the player base hadn't quite realized just how insanely efficient it was to slap boots on even those Pokemon that weren't Stealth Rock weak, especially if they spammed U-turn, as Cinccino loved to do. Over time, tiering changes and the Isle of Armor led to Cinccino falling out of UU and into RU, where it was decidedly unremarkable at best. Options for taking its tail slap were both excellent and common thanks to the presence of Steelix and Beware, the latter with its defense boosting Fluffy ability. The prominence of Scarf Passimian didn't help at all. Using Cinccino was pretty much struggling to get it on the field, not doing much damage with it, and then being forced out. It had potential, but it was incredibly difficult to wring actual practical value out of, and thus not worth the effort. As a result, it fell to NU, a tier which seemingly went out of its way to be as inhospitable to Cinccino as any metagame possibly could. The prominence of Escavalier as the tier's premier steel type meant Cinccino was even more roadblocked than against the low kick weak Steelix. Furthermore, Mudsdale was incredibly common, and its defense boosting stamina ability meant if Cinccino attacked into it, it'd boost Mudsdale's defense to +5, while each hit got progressively weaker, which was of course not fun for the Cinccino user. Cinccino's speed wasn't all that remarkable in a tier populated by the faster, more threatening Rabombi and Ninjask either. Tail Slap wasn't much of a weapon either, in a metagame with so many ghost types and even Ferroseed. Cinccino could bypass Pharaoh's Iron Barb's ability by holding protective pads, but that would open up hazard vulnerability through a lack of heavy duty boots, or a lack of power from Silk Scarf. It was picking between similarly perilous poisons. Cinccino could not get anything going in NU, but it still had PU waiting for it. The Crown Tundra came around and Cinccino returned to the home it had previously been banned from twice in the same generation. Sure, PU was also populated by the Cofagrigus and Pharisee that Cinccino hadn't liked dealing with in NU, but that was fine because one, these two were much weaker than they've been in NU thanks to the prevalence of knockoff, as well as their propensity for letting in tier-shattering wall breakers like Drampa and Trevenant. Two, Cinccino's speed was so excellent that it was worth navigating around its weak spots. It outran basically everything besides Excelgor, meaning it had plenty of opportunity to slice through nearly everything in the tier, and so it did, with ruthless efficiency reminiscent of its previous PU stint. It was so good it was proposed for a ban, and the decision on its status was incredibly close. Merely one more ban vote would have sent it back to PUBL, but it managed to avoid the ban hammer and continue to thrive, until late into Generation 8, where the worst Pokemon possible dropped into the tier. Dual Blade, which not only completely stifled Cinccino, but was one of the best Pokemon around in its own right. This, in conjunction with Rocky Helmet on Pokemon like Weezing and Sandaconda, as well as Iron Barb's Togedemaru to go along with Ferroseed, made Cinccino's Tail Slap playstyle more difficult to maneuver, lest it put on protective pads, but that of course brought its own problems, most notably having to deal with the spikes-infested tier that was PU when it took its heavy-duty boots off. Still, Cinccino was a solid Pokemon, a strong threat. It was no longer a tier-destroying monster, but that was just fine, and it capped off Generation 8 nicely. And that's it. So how good was Cinccino actually? Well, Cinccino's unique combination of skill link and tail slap alongside wonderful speed has made it a fierce lower tier Pokemon over a number of generations, distinguishing it in a sea of mediocre normal types in its debut generation. It was solid in as high as UU, while being a major threat in RU. Gen 6 more or less passed it by, as Cinccino being held back by the promise of viability it offered players who didn't know better and thus spammed it in RU despite its uselessness in the tier, holding it back from falling into an NU tier it would have excelled in. Fortunately, it made up for this with hilariously over-the-top destruction of PU in Generation 7, getting quick banned from the tier twice. Funnily enough, Cinccino's Generation 8 was almost a recap of its previous 3 generations. It started out solid in UU, then RU and NU passed it by, and then it excelled in PU again, even almost nabbing another ban. All in all, Cinccino has had a solid competitive career and doesn't seem like it'll slow down should it return in the future. Thanks for watching, everyone, and thank you so much to the patrons for continued support of our videos and for voting for this Pokemon for this month's patron pick. And as always, if you liked the video and you want to see more, be sure to subscribe to False Swipe Gaming for more weekly Pokemon content. And in the comments, I want to know, what do you think about competitive Cinccino? How would you buff it to have it do something in OU? Whatever it is, let me know in the comments. And follow Maikiri on these social media platforms. And that's all I got. See you next time, everyone.